Welcome back, my fellow duplicants, to Oxygen Not Included. This is episode 2 of Flush Your Heat Away. So in the last episode here, we used the thermal regulator to run some hydrogen cooling loops, and we ran it over here, and we cooled down the gas that was coming out of the electrolyzer, so it'd be nice and cool if it was to run inside your base. You can also use that for a whole bunch of other things. Essentially, what we found out is that with 3 duplicants right here, just on a normal schedule, using 3 showers, I got rid of one of them, so using just 3 showers, some lavatories, and a couple of sinks, we were able to flush a ton of heat away. We were basically able to keep this thermal regulator up and running almost the entire cycle. Well, we could have run it the entire cycle because we still had a little bit of headroom of how much heat we could potentially delete. And as with all videos that you find here on my channel, you guys have left some really great comments. And what we were talking about here with Travis, and as a ton of people responded down here, was that I really should have reversed the loop. There's many different reasons to do this. Well, all right, so taking a look at this loop, once I kind of reversed it per you guys' recommendations, I'm running the 40 degrees temperature water into all of this equipment up here. Now, a recent change added a little bit of contents, capacity inside of these units. So the sink, the lavatory, the shower, they all have about 5 kilograms of water inside of them. Now that heat, or the water that is in there is actually very insulated, because what I was doing is I was testing this in a vacuum, and what I found is that the water was not causing the shower to heat up. However, the pipes that I'm using right here are made out of insulated igneous rock. Now that's pretty good considering, the early stuff that we have. It's not as good as the ceramic that we could potentially make at one point, and we could make that fairly early on, but it's definitely nowhere as good as insulation. So kiln is right there. So fire clay to produce ceramic, that's actually right there. So it's not that far away, it's your second tier. But to keep going down that same thought is that if this pipe contains 90 degrees of water, or 80 degrees or whatever it is, then that's going to be able to thermally radiate quite a bit more than something at 40 degrees Celsius. Because you got to think that the background temperature that we want to maintain is going to be right around 20 degrees, 21, 25-ish degrees Celsius. So there's not a huge range right there as compared to, 20-something compared to like 80. That's a pretty big range. So there were some predictions from LOP 1698 that we could potentially also get a fair bit more energy out of the system just by using polluted water. Because one of the things that we can do here is with the polluted water is that we're going to be able to take it up to a higher temperature before it turns into steam. Because when we take a look at polluted water, it doesn't evaporate till 119 degrees Celsius. And remember, we still got to go 3 degrees Celsius above that to really get it out there into steam, because it doesn't phase change right off the bat. So we've got a lot of temperature that we can go from where we were to where we could potentially be. So that was, we were processing up to 80 degrees Celsius, but we could go quite a bit beyond that. There was a couple of additional comments here, and that was by Nom Nom. Hey man, what's up, dude? And he was talking that as the water comes out of the toilets, it adds more water to it. So that increases the amount that I have at that temperature, therefore meaning that I've deleted more heat because I put less in, but I got more out of the system. Yes. Good observation. So those are all very good reasons to take this system and reverse it. So if you were to set this up in your base, or when I go to set this up in my base because I don't have any wheezeworts nearby that I'm going to be able to dig to anytime soon, but I do want to actually run, a bunch of electrolyzers if possible. And then I'm going to set it up like this, backwards. Now, moving on to today's topic, we're actually going to take this up to the next level. We're going to get rid of our thermal regulator and replace it with a aqua tuner. So let's say maybe we didn't go down heating, ventilation, and air conditioning down here. We went down liquid tuning. Voila! Not only do we get the liquid pipe element sensor, we get the thermal sensor for that as well. We get the aqua tuner, we get a radiant liquid pipe, and then we get the thing that I just never use, which is the tepidizer. Now, because we have a piece of equipment in here that's going to require a much higher current, I'm going to need to have more powerful wires. And where is, oh, that's way up here. So low resistance conductives. I'll need that as well. So that's a 2 kilowatt wire. I guess technically, depending on where my power is and how everything's laid out, I could still use heavy watt wire to run that piece of equipment. Look at how happy everybody is. All right, excellent. I think there was one last recommendation that I read. Where was it? It was down here. You can get better cooling if you put the radiant pipe below the electrolyzers. That way we're not touching the equipment. We only want to cool the oxygen. We don't care about the hydrogen, so that can stay hot. So thank you for that recommendation, Pestarinen. All right, so I feel like with a couple of these changes, I should just let this run before I throw the aqua tuner in it. Here I was thinking that I was going to get out of this at an early hour. Nope. It's already the morning, 12:03. But that's all right. All the best science happens late at night. Okay. That's not true at all, is it? It's all my fault. I started late tonight. Clear floor. There we go. What can I say? It was a nice day out. I decided, to go outside and see the sun for once. It's a rare thing around here. We don't see the sun often. And I do have to record during the night because my webcam simply doesn't understand what the sun looks like, so it has a hard time with the auto balance, as you have seen a few times in the past. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that I am not over anything here. I don't want that to be a false positive because it's still touching metal. So, cycle 243, that's going to be the one I take my reports from. So, see what I got going on here? Yeah, there we go. See the temperature of the airflow tile, not a big deal. Temperature that's coming out the bottom, 22 degrees Celsius, perfect. You can also see where I put the overflow here. So it's like right there, then it overflows. So we're storing polluted water rather than clean water. All right, 243, we've come to the end. And now let's take a look at the reports here. Well, is it more efficient? We still did 531 and we used 105. Small improvement. I like it. Is it really an apples to apples test? Because I kind of made this colder. I'm not 100%. I don't know. It's still coming out at the right temperature that I like it. So I'll tell you this much, though. The reports here are showing that it is indeed more efficient to do that. So that was 104.9 and then 105.6 for the same amount of oxygen. So it is more efficient. So rather than cooling the tiles and the electrolyzer itself, just cool the area below it. That way you only have to cool the oxygen. So I've confirmed this thing here. You see the liquid works pretty good here. The overflow will actually go out and we're going to store the overflow this time rather than, storing the clean water. All right, so enough inefficient thermoregulator. Now, what we're going to do now is the aqua tuner. So let's deconstruct everything, blow it all up, and start over. So deconstruct all the gas pipes. We don't need that. We're going to get rid of all these liquid pipes as well. We don't need any of this stuff. All right, well, I ran this yesterday quite a bit, but unfortunately, the entire experiment ran into a couple of hiccups and therefore turned into a big pile of spaghetti pipe. So I reworked it this morning, let it run for about an hour or so, just to kind of show you exactly what's going on here, and it's laid out a little bit better. So what I have over here on the left is a loop of the water that's being run through the bathrooms and then the sieve. So that is where all of the thermal energy is running. So one of the things that I ran into right off the bat here is I was wondering, okay, why wasn't this running cooler? And the answer to that is that the amount of heat that we're actually able to take out of this system altogether really just depends on the inlet and the outlet temperature of this pipe here. So we know that we're going back into this area up here at 40 degrees Celsius, or pretty close by the time it actually gets to where it needs to go. And then it's coming out of that at that same temperature, right? So it's, well, in this case, it's 35 degrees, right? So maybe it's even a little colder. But then it runs through here, and it has to heat up to a certain point before it's actually moved the amount of energy that's equivalent to what's happening over here on this end. Because all this thermal aqua tuner is doing is providing a heat pump. So it's transferring thermal energy from this side to that side. So therefore the temperature of the inlet and the outlet has to be equal enough to stabilize. So it's always going to reach the same temperature, even on the thermal regulator versus the thermal aqua tuner. It's going to run the same temperatures if we're running the same amount of water through the sieve and through the showers or the lavatories. Now, here's the thing about the aqua tuner is that since it's capable of pumping a lot more heat between one area and the other area, we can run more liquid through this thing to handle more and more duplicants, in turn allowing us to delete more heat than we could with just a single regulator. So we can run more electrolyzers altogether. That's where the math and all of that fun stuff was going right there. So just to kind of explain, that's what's going on here. Let me talk to you about a couple things that I ran hiccup-wise, right? So one thing you can do over here, I kind of did a little bit of gas and just a little bit of water. And that's because I wanted to see the temperatures go up and down. I wanted to get a good measurement. You could just take this and put it in water. The one thing I would say is that don't really build this too small. If you just have a very small amount of pipe, you're probably not going to get a really good transfer of heat across it. You also want to make sure that you have enough volume between here and here to account for the amount of duplicants and the amount of showers and stuff you're going to run. So just keep that in mind. This is probably a pretty good size to go with. So as that pipe is running out, you can see it runs out over here, and there is a little bit of a gap right there. So you don't want to overfill this loop too much. Now, the reason we don't want to overfill that is because this aqua tuner is very, very powerful in that it'll drop the temperature of the water that's running through it at 14 degrees Celsius. So it can drop it way down. And what I found is that the liquid over here could potentially have one spot that kind of moves like right here. This is 7.5 degrees Celsius. Now, if this moves through the loop faster than it actually heats up, it could potentially become too cold and actually freeze inside the pipes. So because there's no liquid averaging that's going on here, and it's not like running a ton, there's a good chance that you can get some water that's a little bit colder than the others. This is not a very stable thing. So you look at 21, 24, 25, 14, 11, 10. Kind of just depends on where it ends up in the loop over here. One of the ways we can do this is make this a little bit bigger to kind of allow that to average out a little bit more. That would be one thing. But what I did over here just to protect the aqua tuner is I just put an inline thermal sensor right here. So if it's below 16 degrees Celsius, it will just kick it out. And there's a little bit of room for overflow right there, and it just recirculates it back around. So I don't have to recool that because it's already cold enough to run over to the right. So instead of spending more energy on that, I just kind of recirculate the same energy I've already used. One thought of averaging, besides using a giant liquid reservoir, right? Because you would have to pump a ton of water into that, and you may not have a ton of water to begin with, or you just don't want that much water sitting around in a loop. I thought maybe a couple liquid valves like this would actually work, and if you set these, in this case, to 3,333, they might actually average out and drop onto each other, combining the temperatures to average things out a little bit. So I didn't plug that in just yet, but I'm curious to see how that might work. One of the other questions I had over here from Discord was, how do we go about actually cleaning the germs out of the overflow that we're getting from these showers, from the sinks, and all of this stuff? Because the germs that are inside of here, there are germs, they do build up, and maybe you want to fill or run that to some place where you just don't want germs. Why not? So here's the setup that I'm using right here. It's fairly compact, although it does look a little complex, of how I'm killing the germs that are coming out of the overflow here. And I mean, it's always a good idea just to kill germs if you can. So what it does is, as this fills up, the overflow, the pipe just runs past this bridge and then comes out over here, and it runs to a liquid shutoff valve. And that shutoff valve is controlled by a clock sensor that runs for half the day. So it can bring in more liquid throughout half the day. And then the other half, it's completely shut off. That way we don't introduce more germs to an already clean amount of liquid that we have down here. Okay, so the germy water flows in like this. You can see it's down here, polluted water. And the germs in those waters are being killed off because the chlorine can affect them inside of this liquid reservoir. However, there's a couple of pipes that are unavoidable. So as this comes out, we're obviously going to want to control the flow out of this using a liquid shutoff valve, because we have to hold that liquid inside this reservoir for long enough to kill the germs, which is going to be 200 seconds or so, I think. But the germs that are inside of this pipe here are not going to be purified by the chlorine. So once we allow this to operate here at the end of the cycle to kind of flush out the liquid that's inside of this whole reservoir and the pipes that are after that, we need to run it through a germ sensor. So this sensor will detect whether or not there's germs in that section of pipe and therefore activate the liquid shutoff valve accordingly. So that will allow the water that has germs in it to be recirculated back for cleaning in the next cycle. But if the germs are clean, that comes from the reservoir, that will then just end up over here on the left. And you can see this is polluted water, has no germs in it. It's nice and clean. So we'll see this happen here at the end of the cycle. So there we go. It's activated. There's some germs in there. If you take a look at the germ sensor, you can see, wow, there's 15,000 in that one spot. And then there's 0 after that, because that's what's come out of the liquid reservoir itself. So it skips on over here to the left, and we get, in this case, since we have 3 duplicates, 20 kilograms per cycle of purified polluted water. So you could actually just put a sieve right here and just turn it into clean water. But that's how you clean the germs out of stuff that's coming out of this without actually running it through a high temperature or anything like that. So this arrangement here could be placed in a spot like this, right? You don't have to go and pump it over into a spot, but you could just put it over here. It's the same sort of thing we do with food as well, right? All right, now for the big question. How much more efficient is it to use the thermal aqua tuner as compared to the thermal regulator? Well, when we start to do the math here, we'll find out that, it uses a much higher current at 1,200 watts as compared to 240. However, it's moving a ton more DTUs in that 1 second that it's running. So it's 585,000 DTUs as compared to the 33,000 that the regulator is running. But once we figure out the DTUs per watt, the regulator is running at 140. However, the aqua tuner on water is running at 488. So if I had to do a number to predict on what it should be, then it should be 105 divided by that. So I'm going to estimate that we're going to see a number that is around 30 kilojoules for the aqua tuner here. So let's take a look at the reports. We want to take a look for the aqua tuner right there. Thermal aqua tuner, 21.6 kilojoules for the previous cycle. 32.4, 21.6. 32.4. Okay, so it 32.4 again, 21.6. So it's either 21.6 or 32.4. How about that? And you know what it is? Okay, a little extra is happening, and then I find it in that loop and I kick it over, and so it doesn't run quite as much. So it's fairly close to exactly what we were expecting right there, being right around 30-ish kilojoules. Of course, it seems to depend on what cycle we're running, because we're not running this anywhere near its maximum capacity. So when we stop to take a look at it, does it make sense to set up an aqua tuner loop as compared to a regulator loop? Well, the amount of stuff that's involved in setting this loop up and protecting this loop, I don't know, is both easier and more complicated. So it's easier to set this up because you can just dip it inside of a big puddle of water and you don't have to worry about it. You can even go as far as to not even worry about this and just dump the overflow into the same pit. So that makes setting up the actual aqua tuner itself fairly easy. However, it does require a bigger chunk of wire. So you'd have to refine that metal to begin with. So you may not want to set this up right at the very beginning of your base. So the other thing here is that in this situation, it's far more powerful than what I'm using it for. So I only have 3 duplicates. I'm just cooling 1 electrolyzer here, which could potentially be up to 8 duplicates, which means that the liquid that comes through here would actually be a much lower temperature. So it would actually serve to cool more than just an electrolyzer, but maybe some other parts of your base as well. So in larger bases, I think it definitely makes more sense to do the aqua tuner as compared to the regulator, because not only that, it's 3.5 times more power efficient. I would say the only catch is you got to be careful of the temperature that's coming back from wherever you're running your cooling loops from, and the fact that you need to make those big wires to begin with. But once you have everything up and running, it's not a big deal. All right, so there's a couple more comments. One of them, if I can find it, was talking about that where you could actually set the schedule to where your duplicants will use the bathroom more often throughout the day. That way you can get a little bit more cooling that runs through this loop over here on the left. Okay, so there were other questions talking about whether or not the pipe should be running in from the top or the bottom. And what we're talking about here, once again, is concurrent versus countercurrent. So what I'm doing here is I'm bringing in the coldest that I have up top, and then I let it basically run until it heats up. So from my point of view here, I'm running concurrent. However, a countercurrent would allow for a more stable temperature, I think, is what we were getting at here. So the way we're doing it here is the more efficient way, which is kind of what you want to do, especially when you're like liquefying gases and things like that, because it's going to be more effective at cooling things down rapidly. But here's the reality of the way it's working in the game. I don't think it matters. The reason is because I'm using some temperature shift plates back here just to kind of average things out. And once we end up in water, there's so much mass down here that it's... I don't think it really matters. And it's not even throughout the entire pipe here. It just goes up and down depending on what it was over here. So unless it's averaged, it really doesn't... It's not doing me any good. It's also not very long. Effectively, though, you would want the coldest to be next to the hottest to get the most out of it. You could reverse that to try to even the temperature out a little bit more. All right, so with that in mind, let's go ahead and try this little liquid averaging thing here, see if it actually works. I'll try to empty the pipes and stuff, make this work. Okay, so that's 12, 14, and 13. Let's see what we get out of it. 14, 13, 13, 12. Maybe a little averaged. I'll let it run a little bit more just to see what happens here. So you see how this is like 24, 25, 25, 14, 11, 12. Let's see what we get out of here. 24, 25, 11. Let's try to increase that a little bit. Add more of those. Okay, so if I set all of these now to 1250, copy that setting. Let's see what happens here. So what I'm hoping to see is that the number over here is more stable. And since this isn't running continuously, well, even if it was, I mean, I suppose they would just continue to add on top of each other. I don't know. I mean, it works maybe a little bit, but yeah, you know what, that there's not really working as I would like it to. I mean, I think it does a little something, but it doesn't seem to be that great. I don't see how that's going to be any different. No, that's nowhere near as good as what you get out of a tank. Well, anyhow, if you want to go down that rabbit hole, you absolutely can. But as long as you protect your loop here, you won't end up feeding anything too cold and having issues with your pipes there. So that's important to keep in mind. So there you have it, guys. Flush your heat away. It works, and it works pretty good. So if you guys have enjoyed this little episode here of Oxygen Not Included, let me know down there in the description below. If I've earned your subscription, then thank you so much for that. Thank you to everybody that's been subscribing recently, and a big thanks to my Patreon supporters. You guys are absolutely awesome. Stay awesome, guys, and have a great day. Peace. Brothgar out.